things involved in the world. I introduce you in Spanish in order to the people understand the ideas behind this presentation. Para la presentación del profesor Scott Lash, quiero realizar una conexión con los desafíos que significa la apropiación del mundo de la vida, con la evolución de las tecnologías, su irrupción en el ecosistema de este mundo y los nuevos escenarios que generan no solo para la información y la comunicación, sino para el quehacer de nuestro oficio. El profesor Lash nos refiere acerca de las irrupciones que la matriz moderna orientada por el orden y el progreso enlantecidos en la ciencia mecánica neutral y las democracias liberales occidentales generó para permitir una predominancia del orden de lo local y lo simbólico, para que con la irrupción de la era post- o hiperindustrial den paso al desorden global y el reemplazo semiótico en la cultura. En este sentido es posible conectar su texto y propuesta con aquella de la crítica de la razón pura, de Kant, que trazaba en los inicios de esa modernidad la pregunta precisamente por la fenomenología, de la apreciación de la experiencia versus la racionalidad pura, y la necesidad de superar la lógica formal a priori y el empirismo que devino de la fórmula de los juicios sintéticos a priori. La propuesta de Lash tiene como trasfondo un cambio civilizatorio similar al que afrontaba Kant, en lo que algunos incluso hablaban de la quinta revolución y que nos lleva también a la transformación de la episteme, ahora más cercana a la ontología de la interfaz tecnológica. De igual forma queda abierta la invitación al profesor Lash acerca de la influencia de la tradición empírica que se traslada al debate de los alcances del positivismo lógico, del pensamiento anglosajón en la influencia de su pensamiento, en la búsqueda de una fenomenología en donde las formas tecnológicas de vida son como una especie de interfaz en el que ha quedado una estructura que no solo es una estructura que moldea el sistema de vida, sino que moldea la experiencia propia de la experiencia como tal, generando una transformación epistemológica ontológica o su identidad en esta superación del dualismo de la filosofía más europea occidental. Esto porque en su texto, a través de su debate, se observa una búsqueda por superar lo a priori y a partir de lo a posteriori, comenzando desde la experiencia, desde un punto no positivista pero empírico, influenciado por lo radical de esta escuela de Hume, hasta el paso de la propuesta de Searle-Outing. ¿Y por qué no recordar aquí lo mencionado, apelando a aquel despertar kantiano del apriorismo al leer Hume desde su propia idea de cómo se puede probar la causalidad, desde la metafísica de la causa, pero que requiere una experiencia conectada a la psicología de James, en el que el sentimiento subjetivo a priori no trasciende al imperativo categórico, sino que permanece en la propia experiencia, que se comparte a través de la imaginación. Aquí el profesor Lash expresa que si bien muchas cosas que hacemos no se basan en las reglas, porque no hay reglas, porque simplemente lo hacemos y trabajamos en el contexto, y en el estado en el que estamos, y lo que denominamos formas tecnológicas de vida, de pensamiento e idea racional o irracional y de algoritmos, programados obviamente y procesionales, pero lógicos, que nos llevan a una matriz codificada, integrada, no solo al Homo Faber y su producto, sino a la integración de su intimidad. Quedamos pendientes sobre la necesidad de reflexionar en las transformaciones que supone la era actual. El poder simbólico ya no es ideológico, o más aún, donde lo ideológico es principalmente informacional, y donde el orden de la información, además, es global, accidental y cuya esencia fenomenológica niega su esencia precisamente por ser comunicacional. Good morning, Professor Scott Lash. Professor Scott Lash, after this introduction, I would like to tell you, Professor Scott Lash was director of Center for Cultural Studies on Goldsmiths from 1998 to 2016. He was senior researcher associate in Oxford Anthropology and Migration Studies and guest professor at School at Creative Media City University of Hong Kong. Really summarize things that you work at. Welcome our university. Please, Professor.
Thank you very much. And thank you for the invitation to Carlos Hernan, if I can find him. Oh, and of course to Diana and everybody, the rector and the vice rector. So I'm going to, I want to address, start by giving a little bit of a transition from Saskia Sassen's paper and maybe to this. Well, really from Saskia to Carlos. So it kind of incorporates, what I want to look at contemporary capitalism, like Saskia does, and then lead it on to kind of nonlinear systems, cybernetics, complex capitalism. Not in a very rigorous way, but a very unrigorous notion of complexity, I'm afraid. Okay. So Saskia gave a wonderful lecture. I was an old friend for 29 years, Saskia. But there's two things she left out. One was digital culture, digital capitalism, and the other was China. If there's two big social metamorphoses in the world in the last 10 years, it's digital capitalism, algorithmic, whatever you want to call it. And it's China. China surpassing the US in GDP purchasing power 3 or 4 years ago. So I'm going to try to supplement Saskia a little bit with digitization and I don't like Xi Jinping, but China, Okay. Wow, this is big. The first metamorphoses, say a couple things about, I have to look at my PowerPoint. Because I can't, it's not on the screen. I have it there too. Okay. Right. I mean, finance capitalism is really, really important. Saskia was giving me a good talk on finance capitalism. But after 2008 and the crash and the credit crunch, the market capitalization of the big banks hit the bottom and has never come back. And the market capitalization of big tech right up to the sky. So almost all, the top 10 firms in the world, 8 are big tech firms. I think GE is the only one that isn't. And one of the oil firms in GE is going through the floor. So you've got all the big American ones as well as Tencent and Alibaba, who are massive from China. As these are the firms that are running the world today. No longer the finance ones, which they were till about 2008. Right. And the question then is, we can think about this maybe in the discussion after, and I hope we have there's time for a discussion. I want to, what kind of capitalism do we live in? Is it digital capitalism? Maybe platform capitalism, because these are all platforms, Facebook and Amazon, and they work not through markets, but as platforms. They say they're not media, but we know they are media at the same time. Is their platforms? What kind of capitalism do we live in? Yeah, they say they're not media because they don't want to be responsible for their content. Mark Zuckerberg's always, it's not my fault that it happened. Yeah, I think that what we're looking at is, in terms of the metamorphosis, and it's a metamorphosis in the direction of nonlinear systems and complexity, in reality, not just in theory, in contemporary society. Okay. Yeah, I think that digital capitalism maps on what we could probably call a complex modernity. A complex, well, I would like to call it, not rigorous, obviously, like some of the complexity guys out here, but a complex modernity. I've thought like that for a long time, with a very generic, everyday notion of complexity, of nonlinear systems, basically, right? And I think we can speak of a transition from simple modernity to complex modernity. This kind of connects to a book I wrote many years ago, with Ulrich Beck and Anthony Giddens, called Reflexive Modernization. And Beck and we distinguish between simple modernity and reflexive modernity. But I always thought of reflexive modernity as a complex and a nonlinear, nonlinear, almost machinic. I always have for like 10 or 12 years, kind of modernity. And I think that's what kind of the age we're living in. So what are they? I mean, we already talked about Prigozhin and Stenger's as a fundamental text, Order Out of Chaos. But I think what's interesting is in complex modernity, or the era we're living in now, power is maybe still in the commodity as it was, right, in simple modernity, Karl Marx, right? But power is also somehow in the algorithm. The argument is, people call it, all the time people are calling it, contemporary society, algorithmic capitalism, probably in Argentina too, but surely in the West, in Europe. algorithmic capitalism. So what's going on? I think we're living in something like an algorithmic capitalism. We're going to be talking about what algorithms are a little bit later in some detail. So, obviously things like Google PageRank algorithm, the Facebook algorithm that was based, if everybody saw the movie, right, Social Network, it's based on who's hot and who's not, and, ratings of 1 to 10 or whatever. So, I think that, the algorithm is really important. And in general, some kind of nonlinear systems. Nonlinear meaning self-organizing, yeah? Self-organizing, not being organized or caused from the outside, but self-causing, yeah? Self-causing and also less deterministic in that sense, right? Newtonian causation is determination. This is kind of much less deterministic, this contemporary capitalism that works with the algorithm. Okay, and I think what's really important here, I think it came up in one of the lectures yesterday morning, that, in Ulrich Beck's famous stuff in the book we did together, Reflexive Modernization, risk society, right? And that in risk society, what really counts is consequences, the consequences. Simple modernity, Kant, Newton, is all about cause, yeah? But now I think this complex modernity is largely about consequences, yeah? Yeah, just the opposite, the consequences. But if consequences lead back in a certain kind of, sort of a feedback loop, you were talking about the butterfly principle yesterday, then consequence and cause are very interestingly related, and probabilistically, I suppose, related. So, but the really important thing here is the consequences. The consequences of markets was the financial crash. These are almost always unintended consequences. There's all the unintended consequences of human industrial development has been the environmental crisis, which risk society was largely about. So from cause to consequence. The other thing is the rise of China. I think if this is about metamorphosis of society, it's digitization and the rise of China in the East. That's changing everything. And the global city. Saskia wrote a wonderful book on the global city, but it was right. But she wrote it 27 years ago. And it was London, Tokyo, Paris. But now it's Shanghai, and it's maybe Sao Paulo and Mexico City a bit, as well as the Pearl River Delta, the area in the southeast of China, where you have Guangzhou, you have Shenzhen, partly Hong Kong, which is a bit scary, because Hong Kong still is partly democratic, and it's scary because we have to face up to it. China is a communist dictatorship, but it's the biggest urban area in the world, and it's got the highest product of any urban area in the world, the southeast part of China. I think another thing that's interesting is, Saskia, again, was very interesting going on about property developers. They're really, really important, but I don't think they're as important as they used to be. In China, China has two houses of parliament, although as we know, it's not a parliamentary system. And the upper house is like the House of Lords or the American Senate, is the CCPCC, China People's Political Consultative Conference. And on the CPCC used to be dominated by the property developers. Now it's dominated by big tech. Yeah? Tencent, Alibaba, Baidu. These are massive companies. Probably don't mean a lot out here, but they mean a lot in the rest of the world, and they are powerful, and they are also at the forefront and part of the Belt and Road Initiative. Even if you look at Chinese investment, we saw it in yesterday's lecture, in South American infrastructure. China's doing it largely through infrastructure. It's a foreign policy. U.S. foreign policy is drones. Shoot them. China's foreign policy is build the infrastructure. We've got both going on. It's something that we all have to deal, we will all have to deal with in the future, for better or for worse, and it's also for better because they build infrastructure in Africa. They not just exchange it for natural resources. I mean, there's big increases in standard of living as well as more possibilities of negative control. Okay, so these are the people sitting in this house in China. So basically, I'm trying to make the point that contemporary, the main metamorphoses for me anyway, not for me, they are, of global capitalism are first of all digitization, the rise of big tech, and secondly, the rise of China. And I think that's the context we're living in. Yeah. Right, I'm now going to move to theory a bit and talk a little bit about from Discourse to Technics. This book here is my Bible. Les mots et les choses. I will finish with some stuff on Christianity. Oh, fantastic. I will definitely finish with some stuff on Christianity, looking at the audience. Positive. I'm talking what? What about the microphone? In the microphone, not over the microphone. No, because if you talk too much in the microphone, okay, no, it gets funny. Okay, sorry, because I know some of you are looking at me and some of you are following the translation and probably get very confused because I think they're the same, you know. Yeah, Foucault is my God, and not really. But this book, The Order of Things, is a very, very important book. And I'm going to make some arguments about contemporary digital capitalism that can work either through syntax, which is very deterministic, I think, and a lot of the major firms are working like that, or can work with through something like semantics. And semantics is about meaning, right? Syntax is about structure, yeah? Semantics is about meaning. And I'm wondering, you know, in contemporary capitalism, dominated by these big firms that work through a certain kind of syntax, is there still a space for semantics? Is there a space for a politics of meaning? And there's going to be some stuff on Christianity in between, you'll see. That will get us there. Okay, les mots et les choses is the French, and that's the English, right? And what is the Spanish title? Is it the order of things or the les mots et les choses? Les mots et les choses. Foucault wanted to call it, in French, he wanted to call it l'ordre des choses. But he couldn't do that because there already were a couple of structuralist books called something like The Order of Things. So he called it instead Les mots et les choses. Okay, the words and things. Although it probably shouldn't be words and things, it should probably be propositions and things. Much more. Oh yeah, of course. And that's one reason why it doesn't work in China. Because in Western languages, and especially in the discourses of the human sciences, they work through propositions, and natural science even more. And what I'm trying to do is maybe argue also for human sciences that doesn't just work through propositions. Doesn't just work through propositional representation. You know, Walter Benjamin does not write in propositions. And yet he's amazing, right? Poetry does not work through propositions. The lady in the front row from art history. Art does not work through propositions, right? It's a different mode of representation and a different mode of thinking. It's a mode of thought. Hernan is starting a research center on complexity and thought. And thought, la pensée, yeah? La pensée, pensamento, right? Pensamento, yeah. And I think that what's really important for me, but for many others, and probably also for non-straight Western cultures, you know, maybe not just China, but maybe Aztecs and Mayans, and a lot of the background of South American and Latin American culture, is non-propositional representation. Propositional is important, but both are important. Both are very important, yeah? And for me, part of what really is going on in contemporary societies, I call technological forms of life, is the kind of heavily algorithmic, propositional, logical, working through kind of Gödel's mathematics and Turing, technology on the one hand, and forms of life which are non-propositional. Wittgenstein, too. He argues against propositions right through. Not even argues, he just presents it, right? The way we live our life in every day. So the most logical, the most formal, the most clear and distinct, forms of language, which is mathematical, as we know, more so even than the most systematic linguistic, is intersecting with the least formal, the most everyday, the least propositional. Like when I say, when Carlos says, come here, that's not a proposition. I'm just saying, or get here on time to present your paper. That's not a proposition. Or do you like this orange juice? That's not a proposition. Or I like your wife or something like that. None of those are propositions. Your wife is beautiful. That's a proposition, But in fact, a sexual proposition is not a proposition at all. Can I have your phone number? That's not a proposition. Although, never mind. But so much of knowledge is so much of thought is non-propositional. Foucault's The Archaeology of Knowledge is all about propositions. It's about predications, propositions. The way that we ask our students to write their papers. The way that we write our books, at least 70%, Most of us, But Foucault is about that. It's about propositions. And the interesting thing, of course, is that Western languages, the unit of meaning is the sentence very much. Indo-European languages. In China, the unit of meaning is not the sentence at all. It's the word. It's the character. It's not the sentence. And it doesn't have the same kind of structure at all. And I think in Western culture, we have become more propositional in our language. We have become more like that in our language, yeah. So I think that's really interesting. So, again with Foucault here. So Foucault, and the other thing I think about the Foucault book is it plugs right into you and Hernan's conference is that it's about the human sciences. If there's Les Sciences Humaines, right? If there is one book that puts Les Sciences Humaines on our agenda, it's this. So we're looking also not just the transformation of contemporary capitalism, but the metamorphosis of the human sciences, which I think you were talking about yesterday. My argument is simpler. Anyway, we'll get to that in a moment. Okay, although it goes through the same places. Archaeology of the Human Sciences is the subtitle. The title of the book is the Archaeology. Archaeology is under the ground, right? I'll get to the next slide. The archaeology of knowledge is Foucault bases that book, famous book, on what he called epistemes or episteme. E-P, it's there. Or is that the next one? Anyway, he's got epistemes. Yeah, there's the epistemes, yeah. 3 of them. There's a classical, there's a modern, etc. Now, what is the archaeology of knowledge? Okay, the archaeology of knowledge. Foucault is the theorist of discourse and power, right? Knowledge, power. But the question then is, how does this work today? How does knowledge power, how does discourse power work today? And I'm going to argue is that discourse has shifted from science, I think you argued this yourself a bit, to engineering. From science to techniques. From discourse to techniques, which is a lot of the theme of this. Yeah. Now, but techniques is not an episteme. It's a techniques. It's something else. Yeah. Kind of Aristotle has techniques, episteme, praxis. And we're moving towards something that's much more techniques. Much more techniques. Yeah. Its knowledge is a very different kind of knowledge. Okay. So there's the book, The Order of Things. It's the same book really, because words order things. les mots, les choses, words give an ordering to things. Now, Foucault's books is one of the classics of structuralism, right? It's a structuralist classic. I think it's also no accident that structuralism is emerging about the same time as a lot of cybernetics. Because I think we're getting the same kind of things going on here. Structuralism says, and right from Saussure, syntax determines semantics. Simple as that. Syntax, grammar, right? Syntax, rules, right? Determine semantics. Semantics is meaning. Semantics is, at the same time, actually, historically, we have the rise of grammar in the West in the 17th, 18th century, and the origin of dictionaries. Dictionaries. Grammar is about syntax. Dictionary is about semantics. But it's formalized, isn't it? Previously, it wasn't formalized. Now, things formalize differently. But previously, it was not formalized. And I think that's really interesting. Yeah. Okay, so the order of things. So the archaeology, Foucault talks about discourses of the human sciences in the book. And those discourses are already structures. But underneath the discourses is an infrastructure. And that's the archaeology. And that is the episteme or the epistemes, right? Okay. Right. Well, there we have this, what I just said. And so I suppose I would sort of argue that this is a complex one, but I can say in a minute, some of you guys, okay, is that for Foucault, his classical period is based on analytic judgments. It works with Aristotle, although he uses it not with Aristotle. You know, because analytic judgment is putting predicates onto substances. Okay, if I'm saying that Carlos Monaldo is a man, I can't pronounce your last name, or Socrates is a man. Socrates is the substance and man is the predicate, right? And you're attaching a substance, or that China is a capitalist society. It's a proposition, it's true or not true. You're attaching a predicate, capitalist society, to China, right? And these are analytic statements. In modernity, with Newtonian physics and Kant, we get synthetic statements. Synthesized with experience. Synthesized with matter. Yeah? Synthesized with, physics is synthetic. Yeah? Pythagoras mathematics is analytic. Contemporary mathematics, says Gödel, is analytic too. Yeah. And I think that's really interesting. That we are working, you know, are we living in everybody says we live in a new materialism. I'm not sure. I'm not sure. A lot of, for Gödel, and I think things are about intelligibility, yeah, relating to Plato's ideas, but just to the intelligible. Yeah, how we know things, knowing. And what's information? Is information intelligible? Yeah. I mean, Alain Badiou can say it's material until the cows come home, but he's just saying it. He gets angry. It's material, it's material. But and he's a Platonist too, of course, you know, and Cantor, right? But I think we're dealing with the sphere of the intelligible, which I think is also very interesting for Christians and for other forms of religion. It is. I mean, I think it is. I mean, I think the difference between Christianity and Chinese thought is that we in the West have we have the ideal and the material. We have the sacred, right, and the profane. In China, it's all going on in the in-between. It's neither sacred nor profane. All the Confucian stuff, all the Taoist stuff is in this kind of in-between. Maybe there's some in-between going on in algorithmic capitalism too. That's in between the sacred and the profane. Maybe it's in between, or it's a materialization of the intelligible, or an informationalization of the material. But I think maybe we should think about this in between. Okay. So then today, I would argue that maybe algorithms. So you go from Aristotelians, Aristotle to Kant to maybe Turing now, you know, in algorithms. Right. Okay. Knowledge or thought. I said something about this before. You know, Foucault writes in the order of things before actually, he's got the classical and the modern, but before the classical, he's got a thing called resemblance and similitudes. And there he's got Borges. He's got your Borges. South America's Borges. Latin America's Borges. He's got the Chinese encyclopedia is part of that. You know, Borges' library, you know, which he's got any kind of representation through similarities. Well, representation through similarity is not propositional. It's more iconic. It's not symbolic. It's iconic. It's through resemblance. Walter Benjamin writes beautifully about mimesis, resemblance in Chinese thought. So I'm thinking that a lot of thought and Foucault's saying this, doesn't necessarily have to be an episteme. The resemblance one is, it's not an episteme, it's not propositional. It's through resemblance. Borges, yeah, Chinese encyclopedia. Yeah, I think that also this, François Julien, who's I know very well, he talks about a langue pensée. Language structures thought. Yeah, language structures thought. In the West, French, Spanish, English, naturally propositional languages, subject, verb, object, subject, predicate, all the way back from Sanskrit. McLuhan writes, phonological alphabets. Yeah, Chinese thought does not work like that at all. There's no difference between singular and plural. Yeah, there's adjectives and nouns are very much the same, and they metamorphose again and again. The past and the present and the future are just decidable by context and not by grammar. So I'm saying that here that, and thought is structured by language. Langue pensée. I think it's very important. And that's why I want you guys to all learn to learn Chinese. I speak Chinese, but I won't. Okay. Let's go on here. So of course, we went through this already. Foucault's stuff, the three epistemes. No, we did that already. So maybe today we're in an algorithmic episteme, and then, I said that already, sorry. Right. We're maybe living in an algorithmic episteme, but is it an episteme at all? For Aristotle and Foucault, epistemes are about knowing, yeah? But is the algorithm about knowing? It's perhaps just as much about making, yeah? And you, in philosophy, and even obviously in everyday life, people talk about constitutive and regulative rules. Constitutions, right, set up constitutive rules. Yeah? Inside the Constitution, you have legal systems that regulate. Yeah? What kind of rules are algorithms? Question. I'm not sure, but maybe they're also generative rules. There's rules that make, there are rules that work in some kind of techniques. So my argument, or the argument, maybe what's going on is that what used to be knowledge power is now techniques power. Yeah? And knowledge might, power which used to be in discourse, yeah, ideology, discourse, right, is now perhaps very, very much in the algorithm, and the algorithms themselves, yeah, in the techniques. Okay, making. Generative rules, okay. I'm always getting ahead of myself. You guys heard this stuff already, but you can look at it for a minute. Right, about making things through language, through algorithms. Yeah. Yeah, and I'm just encouraging that I think it's very important that maybe in Hernon Center and everywhere that we also look at non-propositional thought. And that we think the poetic, you know, whatever, art. And I think it's something we need to take very seriously as a generation. And there are different ways in which probably algorithms connect to non-propositional thought. You know, whether it's art or Inca language or Chinese or poetry, you know, all of which are never propositional. Goethe, of course. Goethe, I know how to say it. You know, Goethe, the Goethe-Kant arguments all the time. Yeah. Okay. So what are algorithms? Well, to go to Frege, we're talking about propositions. Propositions, somebody said something about logical positivism. Propositions have truth value. They're true or false. Yeah. But algorithms are not propositions. Algorithms, well, they're even not imperatives. Do you know how somebody like John Searle and Austin in speech acts, build act, image acts, don't deal with predications at all. They deal with how language, it's like imperatives very often, and other kinds of linguistic forms, right? Like do this, do that, or the categorical imperative is not a proposition. It's an imperative. But algorithms are not imperatives. I don't think they're imperatives. You guys know much more than I do. You guys are all coders. Algorithms are instructions. They're instructions. They're much more cookbook type things. It's kind of if this, then that. If this, then that, and that. They're sets of instructions, and they're sets of instructions to machines. For Kant categorical imperative, to be talking to humans through this kind of imperative is very different than sets of instructions to machines. But they're all forms of language in a certain way. Yeah. Okay. Now, here's what I'm going to try to get back into the syntax semantics. One of John Searle's, his most famous, probably the most famous, one of the most quoted articles in the history of everything is John Searle's piece on the Chinese room. The Chinese room, okay. Because it's philosophy, it's computing, it's where is the human, it's syntax, it's semantics, it's everything, okay. So the Chinese room. Now the Chinese room is a space in which there is an input and there's an output, right? You are a Chinese speaker, right? You're outside of the room. You say a sentence to the room, or a paragraph. Yeah. The sentence inputs into the room, yeah. And then there's an output, and you as a Chinese speaker hear the output, and you say, okay, there's a speaker in there that speaks Chinese. Yeah. But then Searle asked the question, okay, so this speaker has passed the Turing test. The computer has convinced, right, the listener that he's a person, or she is a person. But the question is, does this Chinese room know Chinese? Does it understand Chinese? Can it grasp the meanings of Chinese? Yeah. And Searle says, no, it doesn't. It can't. It can't. It knows the rules of Chinese. Like an algorithm, it knows the transformative principles and the rules of Chinese, but it doesn't understand Chinese. Yeah? That's his point. And Searle says, why doesn't it understand Chinese? Well, because it doesn't have consciousness. It doesn't have, more than anything else, intentionality. Intentionality. And I think intentionality is important for Christianity, as we know. Okay, so the input, we've seen that. So Searle is saying that the machines can do syntax, but they can't do the semantics. Computers cannot do semantics. Big debates about this. Big debates, as we all know. Cognitive scientists have mostly argued against Searle, but they would, I think, wouldn't they? Sorry, I'm being rude. Anthropologists, I think, would often agree. I don't know. Historically, of course, semantics comes before syntax. Yeah. We much later in the day get a grammar. We much later in the day get a dictionary. We just communicated well before, that we have this kind of syntax. Okay. So then, no understanding, no meaning, no intentionality. 5 minutes, I finish quick. Just the rules. Just the rules, okay? Just the syntax, not the semantics. Okay. Intentionality presumes the distinction between the real object and the thought object. It comes from Christianity, intentionality. It comes from Anselm of Canterbury, about 1090 1100. And he, the most famous proofs of the existence of God, the ontological proofs of the existence of God, come from St. Anselm, and they continue. Okay? And Anselm of Canterbury argued, he said his proofs of God had to do with God as a thought object. And around, could we imagine anything? Could there be, how could something as great as that be a thought object without there also being God as a real object, God as an existent? Yeah. So the original arguments around the thought object are coming from God, as a thought object. Later, that's phenomenology. Intentionality and phenomenology is about the thought object versus the real object. No time to go into phenomenology. Oh God, I better go quickly here. Okay. Derrida and others put structure in the place of Husserl's consciousness. Yeah. All of that post-structuralism, and then again heavy syntax, with a bit of semantics and then uncertain. Okay, let's move to very quickly Gödel and Turing. Very quick. Gödel and Turing in 3 minutes. So Turing very very much influenced by Gödel, of course. Kurt Gödel. For Gödel, again, I'm not an expert, but I read this stuff. He used the word algorithm, and algorithms were mediators between axioms and theorems. The rules that translate axioms into theorems are algorithms. In computing, you've got inputs and outputs. And the rules that translate inputs into outputs are algorithms. Okay? So from axiom to theorem, from input to output. And this is Turing and all the others following Gödel. Yeah, procedural rules we're talking about. But the interesting thing is that Gödel breaks with Gödel and Shannon and von Neumann and all the heroes of the beginning break with David Hilbert's mathematics, which they understand. They first started with Hilbert and then they break, as Gödel was, yeah, from kind of a much more deterministic syntax-dominated mathematics. Gödel wants to reach for a semantics in mathematics. Yeah? A semantics in mathematics. Gödel is a Platonist. We're getting closer to God again, right? Gödel is a Platonist. So he believes in for Gödel, the truth is the intelligible. Yeah? With Plato, you have the separation of the intelligible and the material, right? And the truth for him is the intelligible. Mathematics, Russell also, is about, Plato, of course, is about the intelligible. Now, Gödel, mathematics gives us the truth of the intelligible, as close as we can get to reason as possible these days, right? Now, for Gödel, these are not subjective, but they're objective. Again, this is analytic knowledge. So for Gödel, the truth of the thing, thought object, God even, yeah, is the meaning of the thing, right? The truth of the thing is the meaning of the thing, and that's intelligible completely and utterly in the sphere of the intelligible. A couple more sentences. It's not even the attributes of the thing for Gödel. Gödel says that meaning, and I found a section, says that meaning and cause are the same thing. But by cause, he largely is going back to Aristotle, efficient, final, formal, and material. Cause, which are reasons. They're not causes we know it as part of the thing. And they are substance, right? So they're the meaning of the thing for Plato and for Gödel. So so these aren't attributes. It's a noumenon, really. It's an in itself, very much, not attributes. Yeah. So what I'm saying here, but then Gödel also has this notion of incompleteness, so that Hilbert's determination, I can't go into detail, and completeness in terms of proving the theorems from the axioms from the theorems, and there's true theorems that cannot be proven from the axioms or derived either way, is opens up a space of incompleteness, a space of uncertainty, you want to call it. Now, then the question, what about truth? Is the truth of the thought object also uncertain? Yeah. Is the truth incomplete? Is the truth necessarily incomplete? So Gödel here is reaching for a semantics that's outside of the syntax and the determinism of either the mathematics or a certain kind of cognitive science deterministic computing, which is everywhere at the same time. And the question we want to ask ourselves is, in this information society, in this digital age, in this algorithmic capitalism, can we have a semantics that escapes the determinism of the syntax? I'll have to leave that slide out. There's some bit about Whitehead and Philip K. Dick seeing God as a vast, active, living information system or intelligence system. And that's about as believable as I'm going to get. Yeah, it's pretty, and he might be right, who knows? Read Velis. So the truth is indeterminate here. And can we find this semantic space for a politics in digital capitalism? Einstein, God does not play dice, but maybe God does play dice. Maybe this incompleteness is a bit of dice playing at the same time. So the question is that in digital capitalism with Facebook, with Google, we've got this incredible syntactical power, that does work through algorithms as much as the commodity. Can we find a space for semantics, a space for some kind of opening? Thank you very much. Sorry I talked so long.
Thank you very much, Scott. And sorry for the time. We were trying to summarize some questions for you. I think we have a very important question. It's related with the power. Where is the power, Scott? Where is the power? Who is the owner of the power?
Mark Zuckerberg. Mark Zuckerberg owns the power. No, Jeff Bezos. There's about 7 of them. Carlos Slim, I don't know. This is different to hegemonic power, a la Gramsci. It's not that. It's not even exactly power in the commodity, although the commodities, these are still commodities. It's not even knowledge in power. Power, I think, is somehow in the techniques itself. I mean, empirically for me, doing work on China, which is a non-propositional culture largely, power, I think, is in the infrastructure. China builds infrastructure all over the world, Africa, Ecuador, elsewhere. The power, I think, is in the infrastructure, and it's not direct power. It's not do this. It's background. In the West, we work through propositions and the foreground, and even Renaissance art. Chinese art is largely about the background, So it's about the context. So a lot of the power is in the unspoken, non-discursive bits of the context and of the background. And even in our digital capitalism, in the West, we live in this space of social media, where the algorithms are everywhere. And a lot of this forms like background noise, almost like background noise from which now and then emerges something like a speech act. So I don't think power is in discourse, which are the speech acts, right? Power is largely, I think, in the background. And a guy called Mackenzie writes about algorithms as background, too. So I think power is partly in the background, yeah.
Okay, thank you, Scott, for the time. That is the unique question. Thank you very much. And we are really happy for your presentation today. Continue with the event.
Por la Universidad de Buenos Aires y licenciado en